I think the other biggest thing is we saw slight impact or gaps in our systems and processes going from 1 to 2. But whatever gaps we had going from 2 to 3 got exposed pretty dramatically.
Welcome to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. Do you wish your employees were more engaged? Do you want your people to look forward to going to work? Join us as we discover ways to define, measure, and grow your culture. We'll also discover pitfalls to help you avoid common mistakes. We want to help you intentionally build a culture that fits you.
Hey leaders, welcome back to Leaders Q for another episode. I have today with me Scott Wehn, who's a multi-unit operator in the Denver area. He has 3 locations, and really glad to have you on the show, Scott. Thanks for joining.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jay.
So Scott, I was, just kind of reviewing your history. You've been an operator for 21 years and started with that first location in 2002, and then I think second location in 2010, and then this third opportunity came up, and you were able to secure that in 2021. So I want to get into that story a little bit, but part of your story, you were in the barbecue world. You were in the barbecue service world for about 7 years and thought, man, I'm just done with the restaurant industry, and went back for finish your degree. But then you got a fateful call from a friend. Tell me about that phone call that you received from a friend and how that changed your trajectory.
Yeah, so I was in my last semester of school for my second stint, and I was about to graduate with a bachelor's degree with a minor in finance. And going into my last semester, I got a call from a great friend of mine, Zack, Derelioglu, and we go back to my barbecue days. And he gave me a call and said, hey, I need help. I can't find any leaders. My wife's due with our first child any day. Can you help me out? And I basically said, I'll give you my last semester, but when I graduate in December, I'm out. I'm going to be a financial planner. I'm done with the restaurant industry. And as soon as I got connected, I started to hear the Truett Cathy story and just how they ran their operation. I got sucked back in. So I applied in October, graduated in December, and in January I was in FRL, and I opened my store that following July of 2002.
Oh my goodness. So shout out to Zack out there. I've gotten to meet Zack. He's an incredible operator, and just about an hour away from me here in Houston. So good to hear about him and his influence in your life. You and I got connected right before, a while before you had 2 locations, and you were trying to grow your team, and you were looking at this multi-level opportunity. And I have some questions around that. But before we get started in kind of that nuts and bolts part of your story, I wanted our listeners to learn a little bit more about your leadership style. And here's a question I like to ask that helps introduce that. So what would be your leadership superpower that people around you are benefited from? And then what might be a kryptonite that gets in your way for you?
Oh, geez. I think one of my superpowers, if you want to call it that seems a lot of ego can go into that, but I just feel like I'm kind of forward thinking, always have been. I'm always thinking 3 years out, sometimes 5. And how do I want that to be? So start planning accordingly. Very analytical. And I think I read people's nonverbal pretty well. And as far as the kryptonite, well, we've got results and relationships, and it's trying to find that balance. I'm wired analytically, results driven, and I know that can get in the way of my relationship. And through the years, I've come to realize that I can have both, but you really got to focus on relationships first.
I love it. And that's such good awareness. Thanks for pointing out, even my question could, seem to indicate some ego in there, but I don't see that in you. And so I appreciate you, the way you framed that. I've noticed though, that you've done something And I see this on LinkedIn or Instagram, wherever you're posting these, but I've seen something really fun that you've been doing with your team. I'd encourage anybody to go follow your either Washington or Bradburn or Federal, the three locations that you lead. So tell us a little bit. You're a results guy, but you've worked really hard on the relationship thing. What or have you been doing lately that's been so fun for your team?
So as I've kind of progressed from, one store to two and to three, there's been a more of a drive to work on my relationship piece because I'm so analytical, I'm so driven with results. And I decided, having my area director of operations, I'll let him focus on the results, and I really need to focus on my relationship. And I have to be really intentional about it because I'm so analytical. I'm always thinking, but I come across as though I'm upset, and people sometimes get a little intimidated. So I've been trying, back when I was having two stores, just to figure out how can I break down that barrier and be more, I guess, just approachable. So we were giving out an award, and I decided, to really make it fun, that I would come in these turquoise colored pink flamingo shorts, button down, and fishing hat, and just literally come in all boisterous and in the middle of a lunch rush, with a beach ball, and hand out these Waterworld tickets, and literally just look like an idiot. And the crowd got bought into it. The guests, they were clapping for the winner that I presented right there in the middle of the front counter. And it was just, again, a way to just break down this, Scott is approachable, Scott is relational. So it was one of those, like, yeah, I did not see that coming. And so it's been an ongoing process. And one of the things I found, and this was actually working with you, Jay, with Leaders Q, was, the five languages of appreciation in the workplace. And what I found was, as we started to analyze our people, specifically through the DISC assessment, is that about 60% of my leadership team and probably 75% of my executive team, they're all words of affirmation. And that's something I'm not. I want you to tell me what is going wrong and and I'll figure out how to fix it. I know what's working well. So with that, I've actually had to focus on, let's see if I have it right now. I think I brought it. I've got these coins, and I'm very intentional. I created them, and it's basically, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but did I compliment a team member today? Did I encourage a team member today? And I have the same thing with leaders. And the goal is whenever I come into a store, that I need to do those four things before I reach, for my keys. And if I don't, I need to go back in. I am by far perfect at this. And yeah, it's just a way to try to focus on the relationships. During my bacon and eggs meeting with my new team members, I make it a point of, like, look, my goal is to say hi and goodbye to every single team member. And if I'm not, then you need to, like, call me out and just say, hey, Scott, what's going on? And that's going to be my cue. Wow, I should have been fast enough, or I didn't do my job. And especially if I'm just, look upset, I'm probably thinking about something, processing something, come up and just throw a smile at me or say hello. And that might be my cue to switch gears.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so we'll try to put in the show notes the some of the wording they use on the coins, so anybody that's just listening can see that, because each coin had a different action, or that you are looking to do every day. And so the idea is, when you leave a location, one of your three locations, you want to make sure all those coins are moved out of that pocket when you reach for your keys. That's what a tremendous practice. And so one of the fascinating things about that, Scott, is one, you're using your results brain to accomplish a relational thing. So I like how you make it just very tangible. It's very clear if you're winning or not. And then the other thing that's so powerful about that is you're really giving your team permission to step past a perceived barrier. They look at your face, you've got game on, you're intense. You may look, I know intense people that I know tend to, the face ends up looking angry, but they're not angry. They're just thinking. And so you're giving them that permission to step past a perceived barrier and give you a chance to change a gear. So that is just powerful. Way to go on that. So thanks for sharing that story.
Of course.
So one of the questions I think also, you are the first three full freestanding location operator in the West. And for those who are not in the Chick-fil-A world, the West is kind of everything Denver to the West. It includes Arizona, California, all the way up to Seattle, all up in there. And so you and I had met. I was working with an operator here in Texas who had reached 3 locations, and another operator before that, Scott Clark. So Scott Clark was, I think, number 5 in the chain that achieved 3, and maybe Gerald was number 6, and then you might have been somewhere around number 7. So there's a tremendously new thing happening in Chick-fil-A for anyone to even reach that level of, and so there's been a lot of questions toward you about, operators coming to visit, and I think one of the questions I'd like to unpack today is, what is Chick-fil-A looking for that's different when you're going for 3 as opposed to when somebody might be going for 2?
Well, so it's hard to say because when I got 2, it was, I think, just a different mindset within the organization. It was 13 years ago. My impression going through the process is they just wanted to be confident that you could replicate all your successes with the 1. And there wasn't that much focus on perhaps the people side of things. It was just, do you have the systems and processes to do so? My impression with 3 as of, 2 years ago almost was, what is the depth of your leadership team, the capacity of your leadership team, and do they understand fully the systems and processes? Can they articulate, can they communicate those processes and systems? And it's really about, they want to know that the store can be ran more or less without you.
How deep into your organization did they get to see, like, actually talk to people? You've got your level, you've got your kind of executive director level, and then there's levels below that. How deep do you feel like they were? Maybe how deep did you present, or how deep did they go look at?
Well, they looked all the way down to the team member when they came in. They were literally asking team members questions, to, I think, sniff out what the directors and other leaders, entry level leaders, were doing. But as far as displaying, it was pretty much, so we have area directors, director of operations, directors, store leaders. So we pretty much highlighted from the directors on up, but made sure that store leaders had a presence. But the idea was, from team members all the way up, we're ready to communicate what we needed to.
That's good. Yeah. And, we had been coaching your team for a while before all of that was going on. But, I just remember kind of pulling aside, and, you want to be able to tell your story truthfully, right? You want everybody to be able to tell just the truth about what's going on. And so I know a lot of our team's work with your team was just helping them be comfortable with talking about what they were doing intentionally. So those were good days. I don't know if you had any other comment about that process, but yeah, that was a lot of preparation went into just helping people lower their blood pressure about a stressful day.
Yeah. I mean, the bottom line is, it's got to be authentic. They're going to see right through it. And my biggest um, advice, truly, I guess there's 2 bits of advice I would give if you're going for any process, maybe 3. First one is, if there's an opportunity close to you, maybe it's not, go for it. It's going to sharpen the tools in your toolbox, and you will be a better leader and organization because of it. I guess the second is just be confident. Be confident what you do know. We all have lots of wisdom to give and experiences. And yeah, it may be wrong, but I think they want to just know that you are confident and, not cocky, but confident and humble. I guess confidence and humility would be the biggest ones. And also, don't be afraid to attack what I call the elephant in the room. I mean, if you're struggling in one area of the business, get in, talk about it, focus on it, don't be afraid of it. And at the end of the day, once that's out of the way, they're going to feel so at peace from that point forward. Most people are afraid to talk about what they hope they don't want to talk, get asked.
That's really good advice. I appreciate you saying that about the elephant in the room, because if you completely avoid it, you're unprepared to talk about that elephant, then it looks like you really don't own it. But to tie a leash on that elephant or whatever, to let them know you're aware it's there, you've done some things about it, you're working on plan A, B, and you've got C, D, and E out in the future ideas. So that's a really good, because that's a scary thing of, well, I hope we don't have to talk about that thing. So good job. That's a great piece of advice. I have a question too around what's changed. Okay, so we're a couple of years into this process with you. You're have 3 locations. You've learned how to work on relationships and let your area director of operations be more focused on results. And I doubt you're not focused on results, but you're saying we put more emphasis on relationships. So, but how else? What are some other ways that your role has really changed when you move from 2 to 3, that you've just really had to change your job description?
So I think it's really about building the capacity of the leaders below me. And I guess what comes to my mind right now is when I sit with my executive team, which is comprised of my area director of ops, my area director of HR, area director of marketing, and then my 3 directors of operations. My goal is when we're sitting in this meeting every Wednesday at 9 o'clock, I'm focused on not saying anything, listening to make sure that we are staying on course with the conversation, that the right questions are being asked, that there's a forward thinking mentality, and that we're focused on our 4 pillars: our vision, mission, purpose, core values. Everything is kind of filtered through that. But the other thing I guess that's changed is I literally have, when we go to vote on something, there are times when we're almost unanimous because there's enough dialogue to kind of get everyone to kind of process and think, and we can just roll with it. But there are times when there's some friction, and we do have to roll to a vote. And when we get to that point, we go around the room. I'm the last one to speak. Everyone gets 60 seconds. After that 60 seconds, and no one can speak during that time, you have a 30-second rebuttal. You can either choose to comment on what somebody said, you can reemphasize your 60-second statement, or you can pass. I get the same, and then they vote. The goal is that I want the organization to be led and ran by my team, and I just want to be focusing on influence because I can't do this without them.
That's
So,
amazing.
whereas when I had the second store, we had the same executive team, but it was more, I want your input, but I'm probably going to make the final call. So there's kind of been a shift to when I had one store, there was no executive committee. It was just conversation with my GM at the time, and she would get input from the directors and leaders below her.
So really big shift there in really treating your executives as executives, right? They're coming in, they're owning their business area, they have big pieces of input, they're making a decision together. I love how you describe how in the MR2, we might say, you had the one location, second location, it was still largely your final decision, but now you've really pushed that to say, no, I'm trusting y'all. There's a lot of trust built into that approach. So it's nice that you have a team around you that you trust that well. How was that hard? A hard shift for you? I mean, how did that kind of go against your personality? How was that maybe a difficult shift?
Well, I had already been starting this when I had the second restaurant. A couple years prior to the third opportunity, I started to kind of go down that road, and it was tough. Like, I remember the first example where I literally was so frustrated with the decision of them wanting to create another hierarchy, a team leader position. And I saw it fail before because our leader above them, what we called shift leader, would just dump responsibility and stuff onto my team leader, and they weren't qualified, they weren't trained, they weren't equipped. And it was very frustrating. And they couldn't see that because they never experienced that point of time when we went through that already. And I literally just tried to had to influence them to the point where we kind of both won, because we went from a team leader edition to a drive-through leader edition. I'm like, okay, we got someone just specifically for the cockpit, but not all the way across like a role that a shift leader would. So it was difficult, but a little frustrating because they never felt the pain that I did a few years earlier.
That's a great example. Thank you for yeah, thanks for sharing that. So it is you're learning, you're having to change yourself. And if you don't, what happens if you don't change? You don't grow. What happens to your business? I mean, how does that play out?
Well, it you take away, I guess, the a feeling of being micromanaged. I think you get more buy-in and more influence when you're just trusting your leaders. And yeah, I mean, Dan Cathy had this great example. I remember the executive team came to Denver, and they were kind of walking into all our restaurants, all strategic and split, like to see different perspectives all at the same time to really get a great snapshot. And I remember Dan Cathy came to me in the back, and it was right around the time of backstage tours. And he's like, Scott, your kitchen is like phenomenally clean. As old a restaurant as that is, it's like, are you doing backstage tours? It's like, no, Dan, I feel like we need to get a little bit, buttoned up, and I've got some concerns with some safety. And he's like, look, Scott, when I took over for uh, Jimmy, and I knew I had some big shoes to fill, and my philosophy was, look, if I can at least get this business 95% moving in the right direction, that's going to be a huge win. You're never, ever going to be perfect. There was only one person that was ever perfect. That's kind of the mindset and logic behind, we may take some setbacks due to letting some decisions made without my decision, but my input. And I just look at it as, how can I work better at influencing them, which again goes back to the relationship piece. There's that trust value. So if I focus on the relationships, I'll have more trust and I'll have more influence. So that was kind of the learning for me. And at least we met in the middle on the hierarchy change. But I think you got to be willing to know that every decision is not going to be perfect, but it's going to be some learning and growing. And the benefit of just giving away some leadership decision making is really going to go a long way.
So, Scott, we talked the other day about the difficulty in, communication at the scale that you're at. What are what's one tool that you find really effective for communication with your team right now?
The biggest challenge, there's communication challenges at all levels. I think the biggest challenge we had going from 2 to 3 was whether it was the amount of people that we added to our organization, the type of people that were coming in with the change, through COVID and things of that nature. We have found that we needed different platforms of communication, and we just needed to make sure that the follow through of communication was there. So we've gone through a variety of different apps, kind of landed back on Slack. We found that when we're having our executive team meetings, that we need to get those notes filtered down via email to our directors. We talk about it in our weekly meetings with our store leaders. And it's really just being open that one platform may only be, temporary.
Scott, I love watching you lead. I love you with your team. Your team loves you so much. I'm so glad I got to be there the day you opened the third location. It was such an exciting day, and just to see everyone gathered around you and celebrating that day. But I know that leading multi, even as you moved into that second location, it has its own unique challenges, right? That it just is new. And so, what would you say are some of the top challenges for a leader who's leading, multi locations?
Well, I think there's three things that come to my mind. The first, the obvious, is communication. We knew there was going to be some challenges. We just didn't know to what degree. And I think the one thing we realized is that we had to be open that our current platform of communication, whatever app we were using, whatever meeting style we were having, that we would have to adapt, we'd have to change, would have to be open to different apps, and regardless of costs involved, what's better for the whole. We're not going to please everybody. So where is the majority of downward communication really working? So I think just being open to adapting to other things, other ways, talking with other operators, getting their best practices and what's worked for them. It may not work for us, but just be willing to change. And there can be some struggles with that. It's like, we're always changing what we're doing. So I think you have to give it some time too, whatever platform you change to. I think the other biggest thing is we saw slight impact or gaps in our systems and processes going from 1 to 2. But whatever gaps we had going from 2 to 3 got exposed pretty dramatically, for whatever reason. And it might have been the communication piece. You're dealing with 300 people now, um, whatever that might be. But I think the third challenge, specifically when you bring in director of operations from the outside, or perhaps even from another Chick-fil-A restaurant, is having them understand that although we have 3 different stores, we're under one organizational umbrella, and we need to act and be prepared. Like, I've got a director of operations that wants to change our training program for their store, and I'm like, well, that's fine, that's great, but I need you to get buy-in from the other 2 directors of operation, because this will be an organizational change, because we move people around all the time, and there's already going to be a personality conflict from one leader going from one store to another. The last thing I need to put on their plate is to learn a new system, a new process. So it has to be uniform. So I think those are probably the top 3 challenges.
Those are really good. Yeah, that's good feedback and information. There are some that have this opportunity to go multi, and really be helpful to hear some of those challenges, because some of those actually still apply and going from 1 to 2. And it kind of gets exponential when you get to that third level. So thanks for sharing that. I wanted to give you an opportunity, Scott. You're a wealth of knowledge. You've got a lot of experience, and people all over the country look to you for advice. I know you've got visits all the time, people coming to see what you're doing and how you're doing it. I've sent operators your way, I know, and they've brought their teams to come talk to you. What might you share with, if you had, you're having coffee with a peer, a fellow Chick-fil-A operator, or somebody kind of in your industry, what might you share with them as a parting thought on this call?
Wow, I guess what comes to my mind is my purpose. We have this purpose of being a place to learn and grow, and it all starts with you as the owner operator. You have to do something, whether it's listening to podcasts or reading books. But what I find quite valuable is find a group of operators that you click with, gather monthly, weekly, whatever it might be, and just sharpen each other. There is That's one of my most enjoyable things going to seminar or regional planning, is really just the time with other operators. So I would say first and foremost, get with a group of operators that you trust, that will be transparent with you, and just learn from them. Get personal with them, get relational with them. And I think the second thing really is, don't get complacent. It steals your potential.
Scott, thanks for taking the time. This is tremendous. I really think this will be a blessing and a help to leaders out there listening in. I know that a lot of people look to you for wisdom and guidance, and you're a pioneer in your industry. So I really appreciate what you've learned. Great job. Thanks for sharing with us today and being on the show.
Always a pleasure, Jay, and I truly appreciate your leadership and what you've brought to myself and my organization. So I appreciate that just as well.
Thank you for listening to Build Your Culture Brand with Dr. Jay Rains. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. Visit our website at buildyourculturebrand.com for our free culture brand assessment. See you next time. We would like to note that Leaders Q serves individual owner-operators and their teams and is not affiliated, endorsed by, or in any way officially connected with Chick-fil-A Incorporated.